This is First Encounter, a podcast exploring both the foundations and the future of historical romance. Hi, everyone, and welcome to First Encounter. I'm Andie James, historical romance enthusiast and author. And we're doing a really fun bonus episode today that I'm excited about. I've wanted to do this for months. So I am joined today by Olivia, who many of you probably know her by her Instagram handle, which is Not the Olivia. I think many of you probably have figured out that Instagram is kind of my main platform I'm on for social media. So I don't actually know when it is that I started following you, Olivia. I think it's maybe like around a year ago. But I really appreciated things that Olivia had to say about historical romance genre in terms of why we love it and what makes it unique, as well as maybe things that aren't working as well right now as the genre tries to evolve. And so I asked her to join me today to talk about all things historical romance, what it is, why we love it, where it's going, where it should and should not go, all those things. So Olivia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, we were chatting just for a little bit right before we hit record here, and I told Olivia that one of the things I really enjoy about her posts, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk with her, is that she does a great job of articulating kind of what makes historical romance unique and specific under the broader umbrella of romance in general, right? And I, as someone who writes historical romance, you'd think I'd be able to talk about that, but I have a hard time in articulating that sometimes. And Olivia just has great words for it, and I love it. Well, and I know you also read broadly in romance. Obviously, you don't read just historical romance. And so you can kind of see how it differentiates from other subgenres within it.
Yeah. I mean, I did not start reading historical romance. That was like a later development in my romance reading.
Well, that's actually a good place to start. Like, how did you get into historical romance? What drew you into that?
Like, I think I have to start with the fact that I'm like really into history. So
Yeah.
it did make sense. But
Mhm.
I would say for me, it's a bit of a funny story because when I picked up my first historical romance, I did not do it being like very serious about it. I was like, everyone was always making fun about bodice rippers. And like, if you in
Yes.
mainstream media, you always like, oh, look, these funny books. And I always thought that they were like very unserious and very like trashy. And so when I picked up my first historical romance, it was literally in my head for like the giggles because I do
Mhm.
love a good silly novel. But
Yes.
I did not expect to find stories that I found so compelling and interesting
Mhm.
and actually really rooted in history and are
Yeah.
much more than like a silly book cover. So I was in denial that I genuinely liked the genre for like, I don't know, several months probably. And at some point I had to be like, okay, all I read right now is historical romance and it takes me like one day to read an entire novel. I think I'm probably obsessed and it's very different than what I expected. And yeah, that's how I ended up reading historical romance a
I love
lot.
it.
Like it's my most read genre of romance.
I feel like that's a story that's very similar. I've heard this before from other people because um, we know that just kind of generally, culturally in society, it's not only is romance looked down upon, but like you said, kind of like, oh, these bodice rippers and they're kind of funny. And so I know so many people who, even like current authors like myself, who um, we had those same assumptions until we started reading and we're like, oh, this is great. I love this. So yeah, I think that's a common story. Who were some of the early authors you read and people that kind of grabbed you?
I would say I was quite lucky in that sense. I think my first historical romance was by Emily Howard.
Hmm.
And then I really I went in with the big names. I had like Elizabeth Hoyt, Mary
Yes.
Bartlett, Lisa Kleypas.
Yes.
And I feel like that was probably like a really good start because these are people who know what they do.
These are great people.
And now I'm definitely reading more unknown names as well. But
Mhm.
in that sense, I would say I was pretty lucky that I like I really blindly ordered books online. I was like, "Oh, that cover looks interesting," and I ordered it, and I was lucky that I had, like, these names in my lap and started reading them.
That's great. I wanna start there's lots of directions this conversation can go, but
Mm,
like I said, I love the way that you talk about the genre, and so I wanna read a little bit from, some of your posts. Olivia's really great about doing some more in-depth posts. She's recently done a whole series on stuff related to Regency, which I love because I write Regency, but at the same time, we need to expand beyond and we can have that conversation too. But yeah, but there's some great, great posts. And I think a few in particular really stand out to me. But one she has as a pin post, and I will include this in a link to this post in our show notes and description and all that. But it's titled What Historical Romance Really? And you break down some of common tropes, common character archetypes, who are some good authors to start with, but you really do a good job explaining like what makes historical romance unique. And so some of the things that you wrote is that it prioritizes the emotional journey and relationship development of its characters. And I think that's true of romance in general. But I do think that is very much a focus in historical romance. And then I think this is really key that you talk about how there's higher stakes because of the historical setting. There's intrinsically stakes set up in just some of the societal constraints. And so you say love under constraint and desire shaped by rules. Love that. That is so well said because yes. And love is not just an emotion, it is a risk. And I think that's very, very, very true. I think there's something inherent. Like I personally, my books are not, they have inherent conflict, but I wouldn't necessarily say my books are high stakes in terms of external plot. I don't necessarily write the adventurous romps or no one's getting kidnapped in one of my books, right? I love
not
these
yet.
stories, but that's not necessarily what I write. But I think that there is still I still consider my books to have stakes, but they're emotional stakes, right? It's more personal because of those restrictions that are put on them by society when reputation can be ruined in an instant. And, there's a lot of conversation right now about how people are tired of Regency and we need to move out of the ballroom. And I agree, but I also think one of the reasons that it's been written for so long and we still love it and we still come back to it is even though we're like, yes, 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 millionaires, the aristocracy, how did they get their money and power? And we need to examine those questions in our books for sure. But there is such rules. There is such sense of duty. There is such sense of I need to do the right thing for my family, for status, all these elements that add kind of those stakes. And I think that's part of why we love it.
Yeah. I've always feel like a lot of people always criticize the huge focus on nobility in historical
Uh-huh.
romance, but I feel like when you really think about it, these were the people who were like had the most pressure on them from like
Mhm.
societal rules. Like
Yes.
especially if we then focus on the Ton, which was like a substack of high society,
Yeah.
they had very specific, strict rules, and that's why only like a few hundred families qualified for that.
Yes.
And I feel like that's exactly what's kind of like a pressure cooker for a lot of
Mhm.
things, especially perhaps if you are a person that's born into this life, like you never had the choice to say, I want this for myself or not. So you're suddenly in a world where you have like all of these rules and all of these expectations. And maybe if your personality is very rebellious or you just something about you is not agreeing with that, like you're kind of like not having a great time. And
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people they can relate to that. But maybe today we don't have those like really really heavy expectations, but we can relate to someone being like, oh, you really really have to do that, or you really really shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And like I don't you're like in between that all the time. I think people can
Mhm.
really relate to that. And I think historical romance does this so well in
Yeah.
portraying like our wish for what makes us happy and maybe also the things we should do out of responsibility.
Cat just popped in the For those of you listening, my cat just jumped right in front of me. Sorry, what were you continue.
Yeah, but I would say besides that, because I've kind of fell in love also with more working class romances. I think, for example, someone like Alice Coldbreast comes
Mhm.
to mind with a Prizefighter series. And even then, when you know a bit of historical context of like how society worked back in the day, you realize like marriage was very, very essential for survival for a lot of
Oh,
people.
yeah.
And you also were very dependent on your community, and
Mhm.
individualism, how we know it today, was like not really there.
And I mean, that's what you said. You said love is not just an emotion, it's a risk because
Yeah.
for so many people, I mean, regardless of class, regardless of situation, as you're saying, marriage was an economic prospect, right?
Yeah.
Like that was the main consideration was how is this going to affect my day-to-day life and survival and all of these things. And so love isn't necessarily the first thing you're thinking about. And it can be a risk because you could be giving up future security, future connections to family, whatever it may be, right?
Yeah, especially for women. Like,
Oh, yeah.
if you were a woman, like that was your thing. Like, you were supposed to get married. You're supposed to get married well. You should have children. You should fulfill like your wifely duties. That was like
Hmm.
very tied to your identity to be a wife, to be a
Hmm.
mother. And especially a young woman, like you could not just go ahead and like be intimate with anyone you wanted to. Like you had a
Right.
reputation to uphold. And for I feel like a lot of people always underestimate it in historical romance, but when like a wallflower character like says, "Oh, I'm gonna sleep with this guy I'm not engaged to, I'm not planning to marry," like this is a massive, massive risk,
Major choice.
especially during times without
Mhm.
conception and times that really valued purity in women to an extent that just like people thinking you might be with someone could like ruin
Mhm.
you forever.
Yeah.
And I think that is it's more often risky for the women, like men probably get away with it easier,
Mhm.
but it's still a risk. And I think that's why usually it's massive emotional payoff when those characters like finally cross lines and cross
Yes.
boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think that's what historical romance is doing so well at showing like how significant actually these actions are. Because like in modern dating, like it's not a big thing to kiss someone. But
Right.
back in the day, when you kiss someone, like it has real meaning. Like it's a real progression in the relationship you have with that person. I think it's really powerful to tell
Yeah.
stories where it's such a choice you have to make, where it's not just like, oh, it feels good right now, but it's like you really have to wrestle out, is it worth it? Is it, can I live with the consequences? Can't
Yeah.
I live with the consequences? And I always loved how authors find ways to always like come back to this conflict and look at it from different angles and
That
also like different characters. Like not every character
mhm.
is like, this is like super easy for me to make this decision. Like some characters are real like, I don't know, it's a bit tricky for me.
Mhm.
And for example, I've read a couple of books where the author was like, I'm not really interested in this conflict of purity. And
Mhm.
I thought it was very interesting of a like stylistic choice to take this out of like the historical context, be like, she's not gonna have second thoughts about her purity or what
Mhm.
it means for her reputation. And it is fun to read, but I always felt like it still takes out something from the story that you will have to replace with something else. And not everyone can obviously do that.
Yeah. I think there has to be a lot of good character work done before you go there. Or if characters are intimate early in the book, then there needs to be, I don't want to say fallout because, again, I'm not like purity culture here saying like sex is bad. But I think obviously we need to be realistic about consequences that would have been faced at the time, right? If this is
Yeah.
discovered, possibly. And maybe like nothing bad happens, but I feel like at least should be a thought in these characters' heads, right?
Yeah.
About what's going
Like,
on.
I've read novels where they went like the route with they have sex very early on.
Mhm.
And I have to say, among these books, what I usually really like is when like this the sex is the parameter of like how well these characters get along with, and it starts like really bad, and then as they get to
Yeah.
know each other and they start to love each other, it suddenly starts to get good between them, and you still have kind of like this. You have this parameter where you know like where are we with this relationship, even
Yeah.
though like intimacy is introduced very early.
I love that. Yeah, a newer book that immediately came to mind that does that well, I think, is I don't know if you've read this, but it's The Earl Was Wrong by Britt Bell. Yeah, she does that really well. They have really bad
I love
sex
that
at the beginning
usage.
after they're married. Yeah, it's great. It's great.
No, I love that story, and I especially
Mhm.
love that they were both, like, innocent and clueless what they were doing.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they were, like, in a marriage of convenience where they still were not in
Yes.
love with each other yet, and now they had to, like, figure out, "Okay, we kinda are supposed to sleep with each other, but we're also, like, very, very bad at it."
Yeah. Oh, and I just love Marriage of Convenience. I'm a sucker for that. And
Oh,
again,
yeah,
that's something that just
absolutely.
doesn't really work in a contemporary setting, right? It's I mean, you can I've read them, but
Mhm.
you can contrive a situation where that happens, but it's not as believable as it would be in a historical romance.
Yeah, like, as we said, like, marriage was economic, and, like, even, like, reputation decision. And
Mhm.
so a marriage of convenience makes a lot more sense in
Mhm.
historical setting because
Yeah.
maybe your family's in ruin and you have to marry for money, or you really want to have your freedom, you want to move on. It's not easy being unmarried, especially as a woman in like Regency England. You would be treated like a child until the moment you get married. And I think if you're like 24 and you still get treated like a child at home, you're like, I want to get out of here. So you get
Yeah.
married to someone who is like, I need
Yeah.
money.
Well, it's really interesting because I feel like there's kind of 2 mindsets I see in books, and I think both can be true for different women, but some women don't want to get married, and they see it as, like, this will be this trap, and I'm trying to avoid it. But then there's others who maybe don't have a good situation with their family, and marriage is freedom. And I
Mhm.
think both are true just depending on your circumstances, right? And I've read great books from both perspectives.
Yeah. I think in general, like that's a really how authors write characters.
Yeah.
Like if you have a character has a very good family situation, like they
Mhm.
allow her a lot of things and she's basically free. Obviously being like you get a new handler when you get married, she's probably like, maybe not. And then you have people who are like, I don't have the desire, but it's like a
Mhm.
logical decision to get what I want. And I've read these stories and I think they're always pretty great because they really show how, how they make decisions. Like we nowadays we have this very
Mhm.
romantic idea of weddings and marriage. And then you have like this very logical, non-romantic decision where it's like, I want to do a certain thing. I can't do it until I get married, so I will get married to someone who I think I can live with.
Mhm.
And I think that's amazing. And sometimes I feel like it's a bit overdone these days. We have a lot of these women, and
Yes.
especially when we consider the times where they lived in, like if you were a young aristocratic woman, you're probably from the day you could kind of think you were raised to be like, oh, one day you're going to be a wife and a mother.
Right.
And a lot of women wanted to get married, they
Yes.
wanted to be out in society, they were like very eager.
Mhm.
And I feel like sometimes we don't have that kind of woman as much anymore, where she
Yeah.
really is romantic and is interested in getting married and having a family. And I think for the historical context, a lot of
Uh-huh.
these stories are set in. It would make a lot of sense to have young women who are like, I want to get married because all my life
Mhm.
I've been
That's
told
what you've been told. Yeah.
I should
Mhm.
get married.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I think we see a lot right now of very much kind of pushing that strong woman. And I
Yeah.
love that. But I don't know if that in of itself is enough. And I think a lot of it, speaking here as the American, right, comes from kind of some cultural political stuff that's going on right now. We really have an administration and people in power who are pushing very much this traditional family trad wife stereotype, and people are rebelling against that. Understandably, right? No one wants to be
Mhm.
told this is what you need to do and this is what's expected of you as a woman. No one wants that. But I do think sometimes we push the modern sensibility ahead of understanding what this person would have thought, felt, understood based on the context of the period in which they're living and which we're writing.
Yeah, I feel like I've wrote it like a couple of months ago where it was like American politics, as like if the author's American, American politics have entered a lot of the storytelling in
Yeah.
historical
I
romance.
think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't blame people because I do feel like if you're like really like that affects you and it's your reality, like you kind of try to
Mhm.
cope, you kind of try to express that.
Mhm.
And but I also feel like sometimes that can not always work. And I also feel like as a European, like someone who does not live in the US, it's sometimes a bit it feels foreign. It's very foreign.
I'm sure.
There's like
Yeah.
very where when you suddenly like when you get a lot of messaging in your historical romance, which I would say by nature is a quite traditional genre, not
Yeah.
necessarily in the sense that like all of the morals are very traditional, but we're talking
Mhm.
about like often the 19th century, like people get married and have like 8 children. That's kind of like the layout.
Mhm.
And I think it's sometimes very difficult to then make me believe like, oh, this woman chooses not to have
Mhm.
children, but
Mhm.
is married and very active with her husband. I do think it's still possible to have these conversations in your books, but
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of authors need a very good understanding of the era they write in. And when they then pick up topics like being pushed into marriage or being very limited as a woman, like they need to draw from history. And I feel like, for example, what comes to mind in to me is Julia Bennett's The Worst Woman of London,
Mhm.
where it's about a woman who is trying to get divorced in the late Victorian era. And she was basically raised to be like, you have to get married, you have to be a wife. And then she's suddenly in this really, really bad marriage and wants to get divorced. And I feel like in that sense, like it really captures what a lot of women are probably, even nowadays, like
Yeah.
are afraid of, to be in a bad marriage, to be trapped. And I feel like Julia did that without being like very, this is about modern times. And
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it's difficult. I feel like it's really you're walking a line. For a lot of authors, I would say they're walking a line to be
Mhm.
like, I want to talk about a certain modern topic, but I want to do it in a historical setting. But they kind of like just project modernity into the past instead of like looking in the past what mirrors our current situation. And I feel like when it comes to that fear of like the current administration and,
Mhm.
a lot of that more traditional, like I would say it's that was the reality of the people back then. Like
Yeah.
that was the reality of the
Yeah.
women back then. Like you don't really have to project that from today to the past because that is what these women lived. And I think it's always very I'm like that's what I'm always trying to kind of try to get to people is like you need to know your history,
Mhm.
especially as authors, because sometimes it's like, yeah, we want to read light-hearted, fun, rom-commy historicals, but you kind of
Mhm.
still need to work with the historical frame that you have, and you can
Yeah.
just not abandon it. And I feel like if you try to look at the history and be like, what's going on there? And then try from there to be like, hey, what's mirroring with what's going
Yeah.
on right now? What interests me? I think that would
Yeah. No, it's a hard balance. Like, I'm like, "Yes, I want to acknowledge where the wealth of my people came from," and that it was not always good, just like today. But I think there can sometimes be more power in showing how it was, and then inherently seeing some of the similarities today that we're like, "Oh, why are we feeling like this is still happening again when it shouldn't be?" I feel like there's some quiet power in that versus kinda just shoving the modern angle in sometimes.
I feel like we have this debate about like traditional living and traditional relationship dynamics, society, relationships, everything. It's like very complex. Most people still get like
Mhm.
married and have children. And one would say, like, even in Germany, a majority of women still then work less or do not work at all once they get married. Like, the dynamics are still there. And to kind of figure out what exactly is that we don't want to go back to. And I think that's very it's something like you kind of have as an author and even as a reader, like you have to figure
Yeah.
out for yourself and not just expect that it just makes sense all the time. Like it's really
Mhm.
that's always what I try to say with a lot of my posts is things are more complex and not as
Mhm.
black and white. And
Mhm.
I sometimes I mean, I had it with my last post where I said that I don't mind in a historical romance when the female main character has aspirations that are just marriage and children because like she lives in Victorian England.
Yeah.
And people were like, "Oh my god." There were people who had very bad reactions and they thought like I was like a that was like a dog whistle for
Yeah.
conservatives or whatever.
Right.
And I thought like, no, I'm just saying that I don't look down onto people who choose that for themselves, and
Mhm.
I don't look down onto women who lived in times where that was expected from them.
Yeah. And I think you just said it. I think the difference is choice, right? Because again, here in America, we have that being pushed on us is like this is the way it should be and trying to take away some rights that limit choice. And so I think that's the issue, right? And so it's not necessarily I don't know if people have a problem with writing characters that want that, but it's because they want that. And if
Mm,
we're trying to show the conflict, it's maybe that they've not thought about it because it's what they've always been told they want, right? But shifting gears a little. One other thing I wanted to point out, you say contemporary romance asks, "Do I want this?" Whereas historical asks, "What will it cost me if I do?" And I think we already touched on that a bit, but it's kind of again that there's inherently different stakes based on the time period and what you're risking if you make the choice of love versus stability, duty, honor, connection, status, all those things,
mhm.
right? But you did say, and I love this too, you said, again, this is the same post of what is historical romance really. You say some of the hallmarks are yearning and constraint. And I love that. I think we already touched on that a little bit. But I mean, this to me all comes down like what I always think of is how everyone loves and goes feral for the 2005 Pride and Prejudice with the hand flex, right?
Yeah.
The Darcy hand flex, because it's just like that moment that just shows, like, oh my God, I touched her and it was amazing. And we weren't wearing gloves. And, like, it's just like that one shot just kind of personifies those rules and how limited the interaction was and how hard physical intimacy would have been and how much it would have been a choice. So I love that. Connected to that, you talk about earned intimacy, right? And that's really something that you have to build trust between these people before you're making the jump into a physically intimate relationship. Power dynamics laid bare. Again, we're talking about big people of structures of power when we're talking about writing from the nobility, the aristocracy, those places. Beautiful intentional prose, and I do want to pause and talk on this one for a moment. I do think that is a different like I'm in no way saying that people who write contemporary can't write beautiful, gorgeous books. I am not saying that. But I do feel like intentional prose, without getting too flowery and silly, right, is something that sets this apart. And I think, my mind immediately jumped to two of my friends who are writing, Hilary Bowen and Lauren Hayworth. I think they write gorgeous, gorgeous. It's so descriptive, so inventive in the way that they explain emotions. And I just love it and I eat it up. And I want more of that. I don't want us simplifying what we're talking about.
Yeah. I feel like that's what I really like about historical romance is that
Mhm,
even though like it's written today, people really
mhm,
try to kind of, in a way, I would say, find their own ways to do what, for example, Jane Austen did or the Bronte sisters did, where you have like this very rich language, which I
mhm.
also think makes a lot of sense. As we said with like the hand flags, it's such a small scene. Nothing is said, but you know everything from that
Yeah.
moment. And I feel like you kind of have in historical romance, you have to put this scene into words for
Right.
people to understand. And you cannot just say like he touched her hand and then he flexed it. Like
Mhm.
doesn't give you any sort of emotional reaction.
Right.
But if you then like, I had so many. I can't even start like counting down so many ways how authors were like they touched, and then he noticed when like her hand left him that she did not wear gloves, or
Mhm,
when they hugged and he felt her lashes on his neck. Like all of these small moments that you kind of have to be like, that's very special. And you have to do that with language. And I
mhm.
think that's what historical romance does because we have to focus on all the small little breadcrumbs until we get
Mhm.
like the big boom. And so that has to be very highlighted with language and how you describe moments and how you intertwine that with the emotional inner world with the characters. And
Mhm.
that's really something I always appreciated that historical romance does so well.
Yeah. Yeah. Explaining why is this moment different when it's those moments of physical intimacy are so forbidden. And so, why does this little thing mean so much? And how do you describe that? I love that. There was one page in particular in this, again, this same post. This is the pin post, and I'll link it below. But this one page, I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read your words back to you. I hope that's fine. This page is titled,
Mm.
what historical romance does better than almost any other genre? You say historical romance, without even trying too hard, delivers love stories filled with longing, emotional intensity, and deeply felt non sexual intimacy. With real stakes keeping the two main characters apart, yearning becomes a natural consequence, and that yearning feels believable. It doesn't come across as forced or disingenuous. It grows organically from the circumstances the characters inhabit. Historical romance also treats love as a choice rather than a coincidence. In stories set in the past, passivity is rarely an option. Characters cannot simply wait and see how things unfold. They must actively choose one another. To make that choice meaningful, historical romance builds intimacy in non-sexual ways. Conversation becomes essential. Trust must be earned. Characters have to move beyond physical attraction in a world where even a single touch can lead to ruin. I love it. Love grows through understanding, restraint, and deliberate commitment. Historical romance doesn't just tell love stories, it asks, what does it mean to choose love when the world makes it difficult? In settings where duty, wealth, and status often outweigh personal happiness, choosing love becomes a radical act. I love all of that. I feel like that so perfectly summarizes the reason that I fell in love with this genre and why it's what I chose to write.
Yeah, I feel like I know I thought it was very funny when like a couple months back the internet was all about yearning and suddenly like yearning was the thing, but like nobody mentioned historical romance. And you had all of these novels coming out and they're like really trying so hard to make yearning happen and
Mhm.
believable. And I was like, you just pick a random historical romance off the shelf and you probably have yearning until like you can't take it anymore. I don't know, like I feel like that's again very rooted in like the
Yeah.
historical setting that when you have all the social constraint and maybe maybe it's someone of a different class and and you have like all these books where the main character just stares at her and is like I wish I could and it's like you have to for the most like I don't know maybe 200 pages and then
Yeah.
maybe something happens
Yeah.
and it's very feels also very emotionally tense because,
Mhm.
like, they want to, but they can't, but they
Mhm.
really, really want to. And suddenly, like, as you said, like, these small moments, like, even for these characters, that means a lot. Like, it starts having so, so much meaning. Like, when they finally get those 5 minutes alone in the library at midnight, like, it's such a relief to finally have an opportunity to kinda express what they've
Yeah.
been thinking or feeling, or maybe even just have this moment where you feel like it's just you. There are not like all these
Mhm.
people around, not all of these rules that you are so fixated on.
Yeah.
And I think that's just so well done in historical romance. I feel like because of the setting, because how hard it is to have relationships that are not just like, oh, we're engaged and married, but like to really fall in love and to
Mhm.
really have like this emotional connection with someone, and maybe it's even someone that society deems unfit for you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and the payoff in those moments is so huge, and then
Yeah.
the chemistry just kind of explodes off the page too. Hopefully, if we're writing it correctly, but we'll see. But I don't know if we need to go totally into this, but you do have another post that I appreciated
Mhm.
too. It says romance novels, pornography, and why no one seems to know the difference. And this is personally as an author who I write open door, but it's very low spice because I love those little intimate moments we were talking about. Like for me, I don't want to focus as much on the actual sex, and there's nothing wrong with it. I read all heat levels, trust me. But when it comes to what I write, like, that's just not what comes out of me. I don't know. um, but you have one quote in there that I loved. You say, romance explores themes such as love, trauma, identity, trust, consent, and desire. But sex is not the point. It is a consequence of emotional connection. And I love that because it is going to happen because it is that consequence of emotional connection, but it in itself is not the point. And the way I guess I've always thought about it is we're writing a romance novel. And so part of that romance is sex, it's a component of it. But it in and of itself isn't enough to deliver that overarching emotional romantic arc that we want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, as as you, I've read like all spice levels, and I
Mhm.
have nothing against a spicy novella. But I feel like what always kind of does not work for me is like if they just do it and there's like no build up, there is no they get to know each other and there's
Mhm.
like real emotion there and there's like real it means something. It's meaningful. I
Yeah.
feel like it just doesn't hit as well and it's just like not as meaningful in the story overall.
Mhm.
And while when you have like all of this buildup, it feels it feels very satisfying
Mhm.
just as like a reading experience when you go and the door gets open and they
Mhm.
finally share themselves in a different way. And yeah, I think it's very funny because I wrote that this post about pornography and
Mhm.
erotic content and romance because I was very frustrated about some commentary videos online about basically like some YouTubers finding book talk and seeing that people read like Minotaur monster romance and
Right.
stuff, and I was like, you just hear that someone has intimacy with a monster and they're just like, "That's freaky, and it's porn, and it's horrible." And I'm like, "That book is 400 pages long, it's like 2 spicy scenes, like, there's a lot going on beyond that."
Yeah.
And that we just, like, reduce it to, like, those 2 chapters, it was, like, ridiculous to me because I bet with everyone that if you sit down a man in front of a laptop and make him watch a porn video that's 2 hours, but like only 15 minutes of it is actually like them doing it, they would not call this pornography and they would not watch it for
Right.
for the purpose they picked it up. And I think it's yeah,
I don't know.
it's
Yeah.
just very frustrating
It is
sometimes.
frustrating because I feel like a lot of as romance has grown since I would say COVID on, we've seen more young people, I guess it's always been big, but we've seen more young
Mhm.
people picking up the genre. It has surged in terms of sales, and we've seen new people come into reading the genre. And so, kind of what follows in terms of media and attention and conversation around it is like, ooh, fairy smut. And, it's like that kind of focus on just this one element, just this one
Mhm.
aspect of what is included in these books. And I'm not talking, I mean, I'm talking true romance novels here. There are books that focus on the sex, and that is called erotica or erotic romance, right? That
Mhm.
does exist. There is a place for that, but that's not what I'm talking about here. But I feel like everyone kind of conflates that and they group all romance novels thinking along the lines of like, that's all this is. And who are women to want this? And it's like, give me a break.
I feel like another massive thing that I've noticed, because like I'm in a lot of bookish online communities,
Hmm.
that sometimes even romance reader themselves don't know the difference between like an explicit romance novel
Hmm.
and like erotic romance. And they were like, "Oh, I want more spice, I want more spice." And I'm like, then just read erotic romance. Like there's an entire subgenre for that.
Yeah.
But it's like I feel like sometimes even a lot of readers are unaware that it's like its own thing, erotic romance or erotica. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of readers themselves conflate both of them. And then when you have things like book talk where people
Hmm.
talk about like their smutty books and what have you not, and they don't know the difference themselves, like and
Yeah.
then hundreds of thousand people see that and be like, all romance is just people doing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make it easier for the rest of us.
I know. Well, as we know, and we again chatted about this a little bit before we hit record here, but the market for historical romance and traditional publishing has shifted a lot. And I've talked about this in other episodes, people are aware, but traditional publishing has really stepped away from historical romance. We're even seeing kind of established authors are being encouraged to write other things or being dropped even mid-series, which is just crazy and ridiculous to me. And I get it. It's not the popular thing at the moment. Again, I'm a little baffled as to why when people talk about how they want yearning and things. I'm like, it's right here. But it's just not the thing of the moment. And I 100% believe that it will come around again and will be popular again because things cycle through. But, I just think that traditional publishing has become so scared of the market that they're really turning away. And so an huge event we talked about a little bit is when Harlequin announced that they were closing their historical line. Like, for me, that was a huge gut punch. And it was just like, oh my God, if even historical, where this was like a huge piece of them for years and years and years, what does that mean for the future? And I just announced a couple days ago on social medias that I'm attempting to fill a little bit of that void. And I'm trying to start a company focused on historical romance called Besotted Books. Please support the Kickstarter. Otherwise, this can't happen. That'll be in June. But I feel like there's a lack of space for new authors to be able to be picked up. And then discoverability is a problem, or authors are feeling like they need to change how they write to appeal to traditional publishing. There's a lot going on right now. And I guess I'm interested in, what do you think are good directions that historical romance can go? And what are directions that we should be avoiding as we are evolving?
Big question.
Big question. I know. I'm going to get you in
Um,
trouble here.
I feel like personally, I feel like we already have so much great in the genre
Yeah.
that I feel like sometimes expecting more feels a bit
Mhm.
like asking too much. I would say it's easier to say what we probably should not be doing. But for the sake of this conversation, I would say, for one, be confident in what you
Mhm.
write as an author, be confident in what you read as a reader. I feel like a lot of authors are letting themselves be pushed around at the moment quite a lot, and they really fall for a lot of the pressures of the market and publishers. And it's not even their fault. I would say, like, I don't want to blame the authors because
No.
it's more like a
Yeah.
structural problem, but like a lot of them just trying to save their livelihood.
Yeah.
And I understand. But sometimes I would just say, like, I talk to people, I'm online, I see what a lot of people say, and most of them want historical romance, historical romance. We don't want all of that new interpretations of historical
Mhm.
romance. Like, a lot of people are not really into that. And I would say that's what I would probably say we should keep doing the most, is being confident and not
Mhm.
giving up, and being like, hey, if traditional publishing doesn't want me, like, find a way to get your books out, instead
Yeah.
of like, I'm just gonna scrap it now, like it's over. Yeah, but I would say definitely what historical moments also should consider, like, we live in times with very short trend cycles, which is horrible.
Yeah.
However, we do have trends,
Yes.
and some of the trends actually would work very, very well for historical romance. And I've already kind of yapped about my frustrations why
Mhm.
we try so hard to make certain trends work for historical romance, which are clearly not doing it, and completely ignore what could be working. Like, for example, we have a Gothic revival at the
Yep.
moment. Like, that's like massive, and it's
Mhm.
massive for historical romance. Like, that's what we do. Like, we write crumbly castles and brooding dukes and big secrets. Like,
Mhm.
it's very easy, I would say, to write some really good Gothic inspired historical romances. And then I would say I did a couple of posts on dark romance, and
Yes.
I feel a lot of people are like, we don't want to touch it, and this and that. But I would say, like, we historical romance had its entire bodice ripper era. Like,
Mhm.
we write very explicit and very, like, questionable characters kind of stories. Like, we already did that. And now we have the great advantage that we have so much growth and so much experience and so much more diversity in what we can do,
Yeah.
that I'm like, why are we not trying to revive a bit of the bodice ripper era and like write those very broody and dark dukes and write a bit of the darker themes into stories. Like some authors very carefully are doing it, and I see
Yeah.
some are publishing now like dark historical romance, and I would say that's like really good. And I would say from my observation or when I'm on TikTok, on Book Talk, I see those novels being like, here are some dark romance recommendations, and they have like a dark historical romance. I'm like, that's very great because it keeps readers interested. It finds new readers for the genre. And I think I would say it's not for every author, obviously. But I feel like if you're interested in like darker themes, like by the way, like Navessa Allen, the author of Lights Out, she has written historical.
Oh,
Like,
really?
yeah, she has
I
written
didn't even know
historical.
that.
Yeah, there are like when you go through a lot of the pages of dark romance authors, a lot of them have like one or two historicals under their belt. Like
Yeah.
I would say it's not the biggest jump. And I think it's very possible for certain authors, not everyone. And I think that's definitely something that I think we as a community should consider that
Yeah.
maybe some trends are really made for us and we should like
Mhm.
really get behind them as
Yeah.
long as they last. But having said that, obviously there are a lot of trends that don't really work for the genre. And I feel like we have to be a bit honest about that. For example, we have a huge problem now with trope marketing and trope
Yeah.
writing that a lot of people are like, oh, this trope is popular, so we're just gonna write books and stories around a specific trope. And obviously that's questionable in its results. But I would say, like, historical romance is not really made for that because I noticed that myself when I did like trope overviews for historical romance. It's
Mhm.
very hard to have like those labels put onto
Yeah.
historical romance. You can maybe do like he falls first, friends to lovers, and then like it
Yeah.
does not capture the story at all because it just doesn't work so well
Yeah.
for the
It's
genre.
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
I struggle creating, I mean, part of it is just being objective about your own work, but, in terms of marketing, you kinda need that, "What are the tropes of this book?" post, right? People wanna know that.
Mhm.
They wanna know what are the basics I'm getting with this book, and especially I have one book in particular where I really struggled to, like, create kind of that image, and I find myself turning more and more to just micro tropes, right? Just the little
Yeah.
things of like, well, like I'm obsessed with forearms, right? So that's a thing, or like,
He has a beard.
yeah, things like that.
Yeah.
My brain, of course, it can't think of any at the moment, but I think it's hard sometimes to try and classify our books like that, and
Yeah.
put them in a box when, yeah, it loosely fits like, um you can say this is a second chance, and that's going to imply certain things, or you can say it's a marriage of convenience, like we said, works really well in historical, but that's more just kind of a broader setting. And I don't know. It's interesting. Marketing is such a.
Yeah.
But-
I'm, like, so happy that I don't have to deal with that because it's, like, very especially nowadays, like, you really have to catch the attention, and
Mhm.
a lot of people, like, they scroll over something, like, 3 seconds, and if they don't see something they like, it's over, and I feel like, honestly, like, historical romance is not really winning the marketing game, like,
It's not.
it
And I
doesn't have the
don't.
posters on Times Square.
I don't know how to do that. Like I personally feel one of my best marketing tools is my covers. I love the covers of my books, but it very much appeals to the existing historical romance market because I kind of have, I don't know, clinchy, like they're not taking each other's clothes off, but it's the romantic embrace,
Yeah.
right?
But I mean that's
Oof.
for example really something because
Mhm.
a lot of publishers are trying to make historicals appeal to new readerships,
Mhm.
especially like contemporary and fantasy romance readers.
Mhm.
And that's why we have like all these shifts in covers and what kind of books are getting traditionally published. And
Mhm.
it completely leaves out the fact that like a historical romance reader, they want a clinch cover and they want certain things in their novel and they want it to be written a certain way. And suddenly we have like all of these books coming out that are clearly written for a different readership than historical romance.
Yeah.
And I would feel like, in that sense, I think it's really nice to see authors that still are like, I'm gonna give them their clinch, and I'm not gonna give in to all of that.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I would say that's what I'm trying to do with Besotted books. I I I don't feel like I'm trying to appeal to a new audience. I'm trying to write for the people. I'm trying to feed the people who already read and love this genre. That doesn't mean that I don't want it to change and expand. I'm all for including broader spectrum of time and setting. So get out of England, get beyond Regency and Victorian. I feel like there's some amazing books coming out in 20th century right now, which are fantastic. I just talked with Jenna Bigelow, who does the ancient Rome, and she does it so well. I feel like we don't really see a lot of medieval right now, but like I'm all for expanding kind of the setting, the world, and then very much diversifying who we're focused on. Who are we talking about? Let's explore who we fall in love with in terms of gender and sexual identity. Let's explore, different class. Let's explore, yeah, I could go on and on, right?
Yeah.
I'm all for expanding in those ways, but I think we have to remain true to some of those tenets we were talking about of what makes it historical romance. Because if you do
Yeah,
that, then you can broaden the other pieces that you're doing. I don't know.
definitely, yeah.
These are
But
kind
I
of what
mean,
I'm looking for, I guess.
I feel like these are very good goals. I feel like especially getting out of Regency era, like and I mean Victorian is not as intense, but I would say definitely Regency era. We have to kind of get out of there
You
now and then.
do, and I say this as someone who writes it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I get it. Why
Mhm.
I mean, that's why I feel like a lot of the traditional published contemporary romances that wear a nice dress, they are all set in Regency England because you don't have to explain the world.
Yeah.
Like you don't you people already know what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what the rules are. Like you don't have to kind
Yeah.
of reintroduce a setting.
And
But I
I
think it's
will say as an author, it was a very comfortable entry point for me, like
yeah,
that, because there is a general cultural understanding of what that means. Whether or not it's accurate to history, I don't know, but we have a kind of accepted general cultural understanding of what that means.
yeah. But I feel like that's sometimes that's a bit of, I think, the reason why we don't leave it as
I
much,
I think
because
so
we're a bit
too.
afraid that people do not know or do not understand.
Mhm.
But I feel like so far, like for example, medieval romance,
Mhm.
um, like they don't even try to be like, we're gonna here be super historically accurate. They're like, we're gonna give you a medieval fantasy.
Yeah.
But people still have like an idea of what's going on, what did it
Yeah.
look like, what was it like, and so on. Like even like Vikings and stuff, like people know. But I definitely feel like, we could do more Tudor. I feel like most people can
Yeah.
have like imagination what is like Tudor England like. And
Mhm.
I definitely also feel like we could leave England a bit more often.
Yes.
I mean, even just for places like Canada.
Yeah.
I just recently really like consciously read my first historical romance that's set in Canada, and I could not remember the last time I read a historical romance that was set in Canada. I have to say, like, her name is Carla Templeton, and she writes books like they're English people, but they are in Italy. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that's very interesting. People in Italy during the Regency era. It's at least we're somewhere else right
Mhm.
now. And she's also expanding her cast. Like now she has people from Prussia that are going to be main characters in the
Mhm.
story. I'm like, that's very interesting because like the Prussian Empire was like massive, or like
Mhm.
Austrian Empire in Europe. Like you don't even have to completely abandon any sort of like understanding of culture when it comes to like Western culture, because that's probably a bit difficult for some people.
Yeah.
To be like, oh, we're suddenly like going to a completely different continent, and people are like, I can't even imagine that like right now. But I think that will come as well with time.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say like I feel like older historians like in the 80s or 90s, like people like the characters that went to France. And
Mhm.
these days I'm like, when was the last time I read that anyone went to France? Or for example, Loretta Chase, she has this novel where they're like in Egypt. And I'm like, it's so cool. We're in Egypt. We're like somewhere else.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like we have to expand a little bit. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm not expecting the world because I do feel like that's a Western market, predominantly Western audience.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I've lived in South Korea. I'm very familiar with South Korean society and culture, and
Mhm.
actually thought about writing stories that are set in Korea because
Yeah.
they have actually very interesting cultural stuff going on during certain times, even with like also like contact with the West and stuff. I feel like just stuff like that would be really interesting at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's very important that we kind of mix it up a bit more. I feel like
I
maybe that makes it also more interesting again,
Mhm.
because I feel like everything that I've read that's like traditionally published in like let's say the last 5 years, it's all Regency England. It's really all Regency. It's getting a bit boring as much as I love Regency times and I think it's
Mhm.
cool and I love the fashion and everything. It's a bit boring after
Yeah.
like I don't know, probably like over 100 novels. It gets a bit boring.
I think there's a lot more diversity happening in the self-publishing realm, but
Yeah.
then you run into the issue of discoverability and how do you spread the word on these books. You know, you were mentioning before kind of leaning into the gothic and the darker, and I definitely know authors who are doing that. You know, I'm friends with Lindsay Barrett and she wrote The Dravenhurst Brides, which was, you know, very much had gothic elements to it, hugely so. Her other book was set in 1919 Savannah. I mean, so something different there. And um, in terms of darker and kind of feeling more like an old school bodice, or it's not like dark, but a little more pushing the edge, I would say Constance Remillard. She wrote The Fox in His Hen House, and her new book just came out, The Bastard in Her Boudoir. I think there's authors doing these things, but then it's how do we push that? How do we help them be discovered? And that's the constant question. That's part of why I started this podcast. And it's part of what I hope to uplift, I guess, if this company works out. So we'll see
I
what
mean,
we can do.
that is a bit like a bit of the problem right now that we
Mhm.
don't have traditional publishing behind the genre
Yeah.
anymore. Because like even if I think about authors like Elizabeth Hoyt,
Mhm.
for example, Duke of Sin, like it's very dark romance
Yeah.
coded, but she was dropped by her publishers, and I'm like, this woman probably can write super great darker historical romances, and
Mhm.
traditional publishing is like, we don't care, we
Yeah.
don't care.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that it's definitely I see a lot happening in the indie space.
Mhm.
But as you said, it's difficult because
Mhm.
if you're not super lucky and you go viral
Mhm.
online on BookTok or whatever, like you kind of get lost in it.
You
Like
do. You
you
do.
really
And
you really get lost in like
yeah.
the entire landscape of just Kindle Unlimited. Like there are like endless amounts of books there and discoverability just goes down crazy. And it's I feel very sad because like I read people who have like, I don't know, like 5 reviews on Goodreads. And I'm like, their books are amazing. They write
Mhm.
really, really well and nobody knows them. And it's like very even as a reader, it's very frustrating because you feel like, look here, that person, that book, it's amazing.
Mhm.
And you feel like nobody really cares because nobody makes them think they should care. And it's very frustrating. And I
It's hard. I mean, as an author, like it's difficult because we put a lot of time and money into creating these books, and you don't see a return for a long time until you've kind of built up more. I mean, I have 5 books out. 3 of those have fewer than 20 reviews on Goodreads. 3 of 5. And I've, you know, I could be a savvier marketer. I could be doing more, but I'm like, I just don't know how to reach people. Like, it's really hard. And I'm not trying to turn this into a woe is me here. Sorry, that was not the
No,
point. But
I feel like it's like a legitimate concern because, like, for
Mhm,
example, back in the day, let's say you have published in the 90s and you've published with Avon, you have like a massive marketing team
mhm,
behind you. Like, they have all of the
mhm.
access to like billboards, magazines,
Yeah.
radio shows, whatever. Like, it's very
There
easy for
isn't that
people to be,
network set up.
yeah, you have like network, you have connections, like, you
Yeah.
kind of have. You kind of know where to go and you don't have to think about it yourself as an author. And I feel like it's definitely hard when you don't have that, and
Mm.
the chances of getting that through traditional publishing today
Yeah.
is like almost zero probably.
Yeah.
Like you
It's
don't really
changed
see
so much.
yeah, you don't really see a lot of like marketing for historical.
Well, I still have hope in the genre.
Definitely.
I think there is a devoted core base of people who love it, and that's what I'm hoping to appeal to. We'll see how this goes, but we've been talking for over an hour now, and so I think we can wrap this up. But I just so appreciate the conversation, Olivia. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank
Again,
you.
I'll link a couple of her posts in kind of the notes and below here so you can find those. Like I said, she just articulates really well what makes it a distinct, beautiful genre that we love. And so I encourage you all to go read Olivia and to follow her. But thank you so, so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Of course. And I'll keep following you and reading all your posts, and we'll just keep loving historical romance
Forever.
forever. That's right. Thank you. Bye.